Sweet. Welcome, everybody. Um, Decided to change things up a little bit. Last week uh, I had just done a recording and then had uploaded it. But this time I sort of decided that to make things a little easier, I would just do the live here on YouTube. Um, and then that way it's not like there has to be a lot of back and forth or a lot of planning for meetings and stuff like that. Um, The other update I'd say is that moving forward, we're gonna go live on Tuesdays at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time instead of Mondays. We had a family meeting. One of the things I believe is you you need to not only do what's best for you, but do what's best for the family. And so, I had said, okay, I'm gonna restart this podcast. I'm gonna really get back into documenting and um, just trying to bring as much a different perspective, I'll say, to topics that we're living everyday life, different things that guys struggle with, and different learnings and tips and tricks. And quite frankly, start to pull in some of my mentors and some of the guys that really have inspired me into this show so that they themselves can start to get their messages out. But then also just helping guys start to unpack and really become a better version of themselves because ultimately, I think that's what we're all trying to do. A lot of times, sometimes we got great mentors, and sometimes we got great people to teach us, and sometimes we don't. And so we got to figure it out on our own, or we were taught one way, and we need to actually rewrite the way that we interpret it. So, sort of a large spectrum, if you will. So, we had a family meeting that we do every week. And in that family meeting, we said, okay, well, let's instead of trying to do it on Monday, because there's a lot of other things going on, like let's just shift it to Tuesday. Then that way it'll fit a little bit better with the schedule that we've got with Lily and Amber and everything else. So, um, purposefully done. I know I said, last week that was going to be Mondays and then obviously change it, 1 week later. But like all things, I think it's also important to make sure that A, things fit. B, it needs to there's a sense of humbleness, right? You're not always going to be right all the time. So you try something, you test it, you figure it out. Okay, if it doesn't work, then you pivot and move on to the next thing, right? Not a big deal. Um, so that's, more or less moving forward, why it's going to be on Tuesdays. I'm going to try YouTube out and try to do it for lives. We'll see where it goes. I do think there's probably a little bit of needing to do some more due diligence, figure out a little bit on streaming so that it I can pull other people in to streaming. So when I start having other guests to come in, that I'll be able to do so in a way that is going to be, I don't know, easier, cleaner, and still high quality so that whether you're listening to this as an actual recording or whether it's an actual, um, whether it's live, whether it's recording, doesn't matter, but the quality is still going to be there. So still some things to iron out, work your way out. But ultimately, the way I look at this is, um, I don't know, try it, figure it out, kind of keep things moving forward, right? Kind of show the behind the scenes that this stuff doesn't always work perfectly. The guys that you see that have it all ironed out and it looks picture perfect have been at it for years and years and years, and they forget what the how you stumble and kind of pivot and do things and make it work not only for yourself but for your loved ones around you. So, um, but what I wanted to get into was this idea of presence and something that I think is, I'll say, needed, necessary, sort of a good reminder, if you will. And I'm just reorienting my screen here so that it makes sense. But you know, there's this idea that has come into my mind the past few days that um, masculinity and just what that really means and some of the different pillars of the things that goes along with it, right? Because we've heard terms like toxic masculinity and traditional masculinity, and um, then it kind of the pendulum swings to the other side where it's this passive masculinity, and eh, there's a lot of things that we can learn from if we go back and sort of dissect it. But the first piece of this, I think, is just presence and showing up. And, I know a lot of guys where we talk and the conversation goes to, you have no idea the power um, of what it's like just to show up, just to be there for whether it's for your kids or for your friends or for loved ones, it doesn't matter. But just being present and just being a set of ears and just somebody to bounce things off of is just so powerful. And so it kind of, I did some thinking on it, if you will. And guys already understand what presence is instinctively. We just don't necessarily apply it everywhere. If you think of, we know the difference of going to a sports game and sitting live than versus just watching it on TV, right? It's a lot better. It's a lot cooler to be in person at a game, at a concert, at a comedy session, right? Going to see Bert Kreischer live is different than just sitting at home on Netflix and watching it from the comfort of your own home. One may or may not be better than the other, but there's a thing, you're more involved, you're more just intuitively like glued in. Whether that's working, right? Some people, this is you know a topic that I'll say people go back and forth on, which is working remotely and working, face to face in the meeting. And I think there's room for both. I think there's definitely times where, isolation and working from home, you can get a lot more stuff done, but then there's something to be said of just pulling everybody together into a meeting face to face where you can say, okay, here's the problem at hand. How do we work through this? How do we sketch on this? How do we just pull this thing forward? Um, Having a drink or conversation. How many times have we had to go deliver bad news or good news, and we wanted to do it in person because we wanted to see that reaction. We wanted to feel what it felt like when we told them the big news, right? Or if it was bad news, and we're like, "Hey, you didn't hit the mark. Things didn't go the way that you kind of wanted to." And um, having that in person, you get that feedback loop that's a lot easier, a lot more personable, a lot more telling, right? If you think of just the amount of information that we get whenever we're in person, we get a lot more information. We get, are their eyes darting around? How is their body language? How is their tone? How is the tempo? All these things, you kind of get to see when you're in real life versus either on a telephone or um, just through text messages or whatever. So it's not really necessarily like a new concept, right? We already know presence matter. It's just how we may not understand or really appreciate just how deeply it impacts the relationships, whether it's personal, professional, our leadership opportunities and ability to influence, and then, long term, the legacy aspect of this. Nobody ever built a legacy, from behind a computer screen. It's meant to connect with real people, to have real conversations, to feel real emotions, and to really get behind something and to stand for something, right? There's a lot of stuff there. So presence just is a big pillar, right? That we don't necessarily think about. We may think about it in certain aspects, but not in everything. Um, so there's this cool line that I saw somewhere where it was like, we already know the value of presence, we just underestimate where it matters most. So, a lot of times the things that we struggle with most in our day is, the places that maybe we've been on snooze, right? We haven't really put as much effort or emphasis in. We haven't been as present as we wanted to be in certain places because maybe there's a million things and it doesn't crack the top 10. So you only focus on the top 10 things that are most important. But the things that aren't getting your attention is something to be, there's something to be said about that that says, are you aware of at least your unintended consequences? Are you aware of the fact that because you're present here and here and you're giving it all in, maybe at work, when you come home, you're just zonked out because you've just given it all day. And when you come home, you're not really present. Like you're sitting there, but you're not really engaged. It's almost like, we've all been there where we stayed out too late and we went in and we may have been in the office or we may have shown up in person, right? Church on Sunday, but we're hungover and it's just not the same a presence, right? It's just totally different. You're sitting there just so focused on the migraine and just, hoping that everybody just speaks super soft and that you can just barely just get through whatever it is that you're trying to get through. And it's a totally different form of presence, right? Versus you're caffeinated up. There was a meme somewhere where it was like, um, I'm ready to rock this. My crayons are sharpened, my glue's topped off, my suspenders are tight or something like that. I'm ready to go. And it always makes me chuckle because it's like those mornings where it's like you're caffeinated, you're ready to go, you're motivated, you're all in, you're ready to, just do this thing. Then your presence is just immaculate. Like it's just truly remarkable. Because you're listening to things, you're hearing things, you're just, intuition starts coming alive. And so it's like that's like the best, right? The presence could be. And then, obviously the bottom or the other side of the spectrum is that whole hungover, barely present. You're alive, right? You have a pulse, but you're not really given much. And so just being aware of where you're at in all situations, right? How does that show up? How are you showing up? What's your presence really look like with your wife, with your spouse, with your girlfriend, with um, your kids, right? It doesn't matter, right? But where presence and being aware of that is something to be said. And it's interesting too because the other thing, like another way of looking at this is it's that engaged leadership, which kind of touches on that whole like spectrum because it's not just proximity, right? We don't think just being in the room, like just sitting on the couch doesn't mean that your kids are going to be better off because you're there. Like, well, I was present, like just sitting on the couch isn't really doing it. May not need to be much, right? Just listening and maybe offering some guidance every once in a while doesn't mean that it has to be a really high bar, but it's not just the proximity. Um, the emotional availableness, like that attentiveness, and like really the willingness to intervene instead of just hoping things are going to improve on their own. I see this so often where a client will come in and say, hey, my life is a mess. I've got this, I got this, I got this, I got this. They made this decision at work and they were doing this, and it was like, okay, well, did you raise your hand? Like, it seems like you're really passionate about it, but like, did you open your mouth? And they're like, "Well, no, it just happened, and like it just happened to me." So then you have to kind of dive a little bit deeper into that and say, "Okay, well, that's is life happening to you, or are you influencing life happening around you?" And if you're just hoping that things are gonna like hope, what was it? Somebody had said, "Hope is not a leadership strategy." It's so true, but it's like you hope that things work out. It's just it doesn't work that way. Hope's a four-letter word and it doesn't get you very far. There's something to be said for hope, like hope is important with the right context, but that's not going to be a strategy that says like, well, I hope I make money. Okay, you can hope, but that doesn't mean that it's going to happen, right? Hope in one hand and crap in the other and see which one fills up first. Like we have all heard these lines. It's just we don't like to look at the areas of life where maybe we have a hope strategy instead of an actual active strategy. And, there's it doesn't even have to necessarily be as granular as that. Like distraction is a huge piece of not being present. And just especially in today's world, like especially in today's world, there are so many opportunities for distractions. It's crazy. I was at a coffee shop and, waiting for the order to come up, right? So, chocolate chip cookie for Lily and Amber's got her special coffee and everything. Waiting for it all to be made, and I'm standing next to a guy next to me, and it was like he'd look at his phone and he'd be like, "All right, lock screen," and then all of a sudden it would ding, and he'd like pull it back out, and it was like spam. It wasn't even like anything. Like, sorry to be a little bit of a creeper, but I was just like, my God, like what? Like, is this guy like for real? He's just like blowing up nonstop. But the notifications weren't important. It was like, "Oh, hey, HP's having a sale for printer ink." Like, bro, if you're allowing yourself to get distracted for that, then you don't stand a chance at getting anything that you want out of life. You're just gonna be too busy being busy all the time and not actually able to go do and influence anything. There's so many distractions right now where, people just even a cell phone, like just having a cell phone, there's tons of opportunity for distractions, but it's not even just that. Now we've got a work phone and a personal phone, and then we have iPads that goes along with it, and then a laptop and a work laptop and a personal laptop, and just nonstop, right? Netflix on the TV, different music going on, like podcasts. There's just so much out there that you just have to be intentional. You have to have intentionality. Like, what is it that you will actually want to be notified about? Because it's funny, because for anybody that knows me is gonna be like, "Well, hold on a second, bro. You've got multiple phones, you've got iPad, you've got all those same devices you talked about." But the thing that I'd say I do differently is I'm very purposeful on the notifications and whose notifications I'm willing to actually interrupt my day. Like Amber, 100%. Anything happens, she texts me, anything, it comes through. Like no matter what settings, no matter what distractions or whatever, like that's most important. But then outside of that, Facebook Messenger and a lot of emails, unless you're like a couple key people, I'll look at emails, but I'm not going to be distracted by it, because the more that I'm distracted, the less that I have to focus on what it is that I'm trying to go do. And some of this may seem simple, but sometimes this may be the first time that you're hearing it. Um, I've had the luxury of being with people who they essentially have their phone on like do not disturb all day, and they unlock it for like 1 hour, and they play catch up on everything. And then it's just like, that's it. And, that's a strategy for him, peace, right? That works for him. Doesn't necessarily work for me, right? I've got a little bit different of a strategy, but like knowing that you have to have a strategy for that so that you're just not getting distracted and getting pulled into literally anything that is going on in the world today. Because I mean, just and it's all the things like the news. Like right now in the news, it's like I had to turn off. I had wanted to be informed. It was like, okay, if late breaking or some type of news happens or whatever, like send me a notification. Well, then it was happening like 4 and 5 times a day, and it was just all this clickbaity stuff. So again, it's like I look at it and go, well, how much value is that really bringing me? Versus if there is something that I hear, rumblings on, I can go do my due diligence and get that piece of information. But otherwise, it's just going to be, guess what Trump did here, or guess what, is happening over in Iran, or like there's just so many things, whether it's domestically or whether it's internationally, that you can just become way oversaturated in distractions. And so again, if I bring this back to like that engaged leadership, it's, you know, we it impacts our ability to be a great leader. And so we don't even necessarily think about all the ways that we're getting distracted. Like there's substances, there's, whether it's drinking, whether it's weed, whether it's like whatever it is out there. Social media, lust is a big, big distraction opportunity. Endless scrolling, within social media. Like you can just there is no bottom of the feed. Like it's cool. Well, it's cool and it's a little scary actually. There was a time when social media came out where it was like, okay, you and your, 10 friends or whatever it is, that you met at college or whatever on Facebook, and you'd scroll through and you're like, all right, cool. Like, so they're doing this, they're doing this. And you would hit the bottom of the feed. Like, you'd actually just like, boom. All right. You are up to date on all the shit that's happening in the world, like around your circle, your social bubble. And you always just remember, I was like, all right, cool. Like, I feel good. Like, I'm on it. Like, pictures of what they ate, where they were going to be tonight, where the party's going to be, like on it, solid, right? Good. But now, like, there's no end. You just keep going until anything, right? Because there's always ads in there, and so it just will just be a never ending scroll. And the algorithm is so smart that it will, if you spend a little bit longer on this post, then all of a sudden it'll start showing you more of those, and it's meant, right? The algorithm is meant to keep you online as long as possible, which then can look into, work as like an avoidance because you're being distracted. So then it's like, okay, well, I'm avoiding the thing that I really need to get done. Like I really avoiding the thing that I need to lean into and really get that job done. Um, and there's also a piece, when we talk about like the wheel of life, like around spirituality. Um, a lot of times spirituality is like, I'll just do that later. I got to go do the things. I got to go do the top 10 most important things in my life right now. And I'll worry about all that other stuff a little bit later, until it becomes a burning on fire dumpster fire. Well, if you're always dealing with dumpster fires and you're never able to get ahead, how good of a strategy is that really? Like companies that look at this, right? That are always in firefighting mode, they burn their people out. They end up having a high turnover rate, and they can never get out from the dumpster fire, like the endless dumpster fires. They're just constantly trading attention and just trying to get ahead, and they're not in control of their own ship. So they can never focus. They can never go and hit new growth because they're so busy trying to clean up the shitstorm that's going on right now that they can never get ahead. Um, so it's something that is a real thing in the world, whether this is just an individual one-on-one, or whether it's a corporation, or whether it's a small business, like it doesn't matter. Um, and so the other interesting thing that like noticed recently is that avoidance never really stabilizes. Like I always had this thought, right? It was a lie that I told myself, and I was really good at convincing myself of this too. But it was like, all right, well, I'm just going to avoid this, and things will work out on its own. Maybe it'll stabilize itself, right? Maybe the problem will go away. It doesn't. It it just it becomes that burning dumpster that you have to go deal with. And in some ways the problems get harder and more complex, and so it's like it never fixes itself, it never resolves, it actually decays. So the things that you're not taking action on today, those problems decay, and it's no longer just the problem, but now it's like a rotting, stinking, fleshy problem. And so there's a lot of things that just you have to go and do, that it would have started with maybe a 5-minute task that now is turning into an hour and sometimes days in order to go fix whatever it is that had gotten messed up. And so it's one of those things that it's like, it's not necessarily, where it is that you're showing up in presence, but it's also like, what are the like the opposite, like the antithesis of that is, okay, what are the things that you're just tolerating? What are the areas where your presence is super low? So like what a man tolerates unattended eventually becomes uncontrollable. So are you not showing up as much? This is a perfect time of year, right? So we're January 13th. Seen so many guys already where they're like, oh yeah, January, this is going to be the year that I'm going to turn around and get in shape. And it's like, they're guys, I'm always going to root for you. I'm always going to root that you're going to hold true to what it is that you're trying to go after. But when somebody needs to lose like 30 pounds, that's a that's a decent chunk. What maybe have started at a couple pounds, you could shed that in a week, right? You could go do, you know, skip a meal, skip a couple meals, maybe go for like an extra walk, get some 10,000 steps in a day, and like you can get that solved pretty quick. But as soon as that starts getting up into like the 10 pounds, 20 pounds, 30 pounds, 50 plus pounds, like that's that's some serious lifestyle changes that it just becomes very hard to get back in the box. And unfortunately, like, we can see that, physical, like how much weight that we carry on our frame. Like we can kind of see that as somewhat of an easier type thing. Not even necessarily easy, right? Because a lot of people don't wait until, or they wait until it becomes too far. But it's like there's things that we can do in all of our areas of life, where when problems are a little small, like when maybe you notice that a friend starts to go on cold, somebody is, your one of your closest friends isn't opening up to you as much, right? You just don't know what's going on in their life. A spouse maybe starts turning cold, conversations get shorter, passion and emotion starts to get right, that feel different. Catch it while it's small, catch it while it's there. Like that's an area back to you that says, hey, like this is something that we got to focus on. Does Again, it doesn't always have to be this big heroic of a thing. It just could be as simple as just opening the door and having a conversation. And, going back to like last week with the resolve, like truly resolve, get down to root cause and figure out, right? Is it that you're given so much at work that you have nothing left to give at home? And there's not to say that like this whole balance, this idea around balance has to be optimized all the time. Like there's definitely times where it's go time, and I give a lot more right on the professional side than I do in the personal side. But we have a conversation knowing what we get into and knowing what those guardrails are, where it's like, hey, if you start slipping on some of these things, like then it's going to become a problem. But knowing where the guardrails are going into it is super important, because if you don't, then it just becomes a runaway train. Or even worse is that it goes so far that then you have resentment because you didn't talk about those things. And now all of a sudden it's like, oh shit, right? We're we're on divorce lane, and how did we get here? And it just was because the wheel had just been slept on, right? There's nobody manning the wheel, the steering wheel. Um, so I wanted to pivot over to some research because I always like the idea of all like a I don't know what the right word is, but like a multiple angles of looking at this type of stuff. So, there's obviously, um, things we can talk about like spiritual, like in the Bible or around Proverbs, where wisdom is attentiveness and folly is the negligence and the drift, and what that really means. There's the practical everyday living, like what do we deal with day in and day out. But then there's also like the research side, which as an engineer, I'm always fascinated by because there's a lot to be said for what we think we know, and then what we would not have really understood unless there was actually data. And so, one of the points that I wanted to point to just around this whole idea around presence and like showing up and being aware of where you're showing up is emotional absence is actually one of those strongest predictors of relationship breakdown. So John Gottman is he founded Gottman Institute, and he identified stonewalling as one of the four horsemen for divorce. And so stonewalling, for any of those that don't know what that means, is essentially like emotional shutdown, avoidance and disengagement. And so that by having that, basically that predicts divorce with over 90% accuracy, which that one probably, not necessarily, but it's it's interesting to me because I've seen so many people and so many relationships where it, it's like stonewalling is in response to something. Like somebody doesn't like the way the tone that they once had. And so it was like, okay, if you go to some philosophy and like Machiavellian thing, it's like, okay, well then I'm just gonna restrict access. So I'm gonna essentially just be more disengaged. And in doing that, that's going to create an emotional trigger in them, and then they're going to want to give me more attention. So I'm ultimately going to get what I want, but it's done in a manipulative way. And those are I don't know, those are games that I have played before, but it never really results in getting the thing that you want, because you'll get it, but it won't come, and it won't feel as good, and it won't feel as authentic than if you were to just have open communications with it. Like I've done both the whole like really manipulative type side of situations, and then I I don't want to be that smart. I don't want to be that manipulative. Like this is just the thing that's bothering me. And I would hands down always go to the just say whatever's on your mind. Like leaning into discomfort with the right person will bring you closer together, not further apart. But doing the whole stonewalling and emotional avoidance and that shutting down and that disengagement will 100% lead to the divorce, right? Will 100% lead to your best friend no longer speaking to you, and you guys, right, go your separate ways. Um, and it's I see this so often. It's just emotional withdrawal because they feel like they're, both guys and girls. This isn't just a guy thing, but there's so many women that feel like their voice isn't heard in a relationship. And then they just start to withdraw. And it's like as soon as you start to withdraw, right? As soon as you take your presence from like that highly caffeinated, crayon sharpened, glue topped off type of tension and presence in a relationship, and you start removing yourself more and more, it's just a slippery slope until it's just like, what are we doing here? Right? That's how a lot of those conversations end up, right? It's like, what are we doing here? Why are we still even together? You obviously aren't emotionally involved in this anymore. Like, like why? Like, why even just continue to keep showing up? And we never really asked the question. It's funny that we asked that question, but we never asked the question up ahead, which is like, well, hold on a second. Like, why are you starting to pull away emotionally? Like, what's going on? Let's talk. Let's have that conversation, not the, well, you're already emotionally pulled away. So F it. Let's just like pull the whole trigger and just be done with it. And it's not to say that all relationships, it takes two to work through this. Um, and you they have to have a lot of due diligence, but there's a lot of conversations that we're not having. And so, The interesting thing also, right, if we start turning like on the biblical side is um there's an excerpt from Ephesians chapter 5 where it says husbands are called to love sacrificially, not passively. And this is one that always is like that verse always strikes me is hard. It's always hard. It's always hard to hear that essentially you just have to just love sacrificially, just nonstop, right? Love like you just can't shut it off, right? To just go all in and just love unconditionally. And it's really hard because the ego wants to come in and go, well, hold on, but I can love. Man, this is always funny, right? I can love unconditionally as long as there's a condition, which is really love. It's really just conditional love. Um, but it's when you in a lot of times in a relationship, the other person will mimic what it is that you do. So if you love unconditionally, like I hear from a lot of guys like, "Well, I don't want to love too much because if I spoil her, then she's just going to have high expectations and then she's not going to reciprocate." Well, a lot of times the thing that you avoid is the reason why you're in that spot. But if you started showing up differently and actually loved and gave her more compassion and grace and said like, but this isn't how we do things, and show from a standpoint of leadership on what that looks like and like modeling a different approach, like modeling unconditional love, you'll actually realize that a lot of times people's bad habits are like tr- bad isms, if you will, in a relationship often aren't because of you. It's because of a previous trauma that's taught them how to handle that type of situation. And it's through modeling a better behavior that can start to make the difference, or in some ways, like change the game on how we show up and how fruitful a relationship can be. It's no longer like I'm doing enough just to stay married, but it's like, why shouldn't marriage be this wonderful, like, why shouldn't it be that your best it's like you get to marry your best friend. Like Amber and I talk about this all the time where it's like we are so blessed to have each other as our best friend. But a lot of like that whole feeling of what it like we get to enjoy the fruits of it, but it started as really being open and honest of where we were and what it is that we wanted and where do we need support, and just being a really team player and just to love recognizing that we're we're not doing anything out of malice towards each other. If we raise our voice or we do something, it's there's some trauma that needs to be identified there and talked through and worked through, right? That whole resolve and that whole reconciliation needs to occur, not just lipstick and just move on. Like we try not to deal with problems. I'm not going to say like we get it perfect because we don't, but you try not to just deal with problems. If something happens, like figure it out. Like we gotta, if you're not feeling hurt, if you feel like, you're pulling a lot more weight than you can handle right now, then okay. Like Brene Brown talked about it great. She's like, there is no like 50-50. This isn't like, okay, well, I did my 50, so you better give up your 50. There's some days where it's 100% on me and Amber's just not feeling good and she's just not doing well, and that's okay. I don't sit there and do the tic tacky. Like there was a time in my 20s when I definitely felt kind of that way. This was pre Amber. Um, but it's like there's days that I give 100% and she doesn't. And that's cool because guess what? There's days where I just feel god awful, completely overwhelmed, don't know where to go, and just or feel like sick off my hind end, and she's taking 100% and she's making sure everything gets done. And so recognizing that you have to have people, you have to have people in your life, right? In this instance it's my wife, but that are willing to give more than 100% or give that 100% for that relationship. And, 100% really means that their presence is spot on. So if you're only given to 50%, then that tells you kind of automatically like that might be an area of presence that you could be improving on, which is, hey, you know what? There's some room to grow here. Um, and the thing too, that I feel like a lot of guys can get into, and I had done this earlier in my life too, which was around this whole like being emotionally absent isn't keeping the peace. It's essentially leadership abandonment. And when you just show up and you're just saying, I'm just going to be absent from this because I just want to keep the peace, you're just sacrificing your peace. And that's building resentment that will later come out in some other way that you probably don't want that to come out. And it's this lie that we think that peace is when there's no conflict, and that's not true. That's a lie that we tell ourselves, and I'm guilty of that. I by no means think that I've never endured that, because there were definitely at times where I was just a people pleasing, right? Had my people pleasing era, if you will, where I would just be doing anything and everything possible for everybody else, and I would not care at all what it meant for me. And that meant driving, including on Christmas Eve, or Christmas Day, getting pulled over by a cop at 2 a.m., going 100 miles an hour down the road because I was just so burned out that I just ultimately wanted to get to where I was going because I just could not give anymore. Right. So definitely know what that feels like. But on the other side of that, seeing both worlds, like living in that and then also living in a world where like you can only give what you can give. Um, in knowing, right, that presence, being like aware and having a pulse on your presence is important, because then it knows, it's that feedback loop that tells you where you're abandoning your leadership opportunities and where, you're doing well. And so, the other cool thing, like if we transition to presence and like what that means for like not even just the relationship, but like or not like with your spouse, but from a kid standpoint, they they thrive. Kids thrive so much on a male figure in their life growing up. Dr. Michael Lamb did this cool study where engaged fathers are linked to having kids who have higher confidence. They have a better emotional regulation statistically, and they have an increased independence. And so, what what I've tend to notice, and it's interesting because I get a lot of um, requests to go coach sons, and they're like, you got to coach my son. Like he's still living here at home, and um, he's got to get out. He's just got to get more independent. And it's like, I hate to break it to you, but there's probably some things in there that he may have been overmothered and underfathered, which then is hard for the guy to hear because again, guys try to be in all places at all times. And, one of the big things for guys is like, well, I want to provide for my family. So I have to go out to work. Well, whenever I'm out to work, that means that I'm not present back at the home. Or by the time I get home, I feel completely emotionally wiped. So then, but when I do show up at home, I just want to sit on the couch and just, sure, sure. Yeah. Yeah, Johnny, that's great. Right. Whatever you did is cool. That's great. But like those are some key moments and key opportunities that can make a big difference. The things in our life that matter the most are like the things that we do every single day. It isn't that once in a lifetime trip to Europe. It's not the one time or the handful of times that you go to Disney World. Like those are great memories, but those aren't going to be the things that you ultimately define your life, your legacy, and what you've achieved in this life. It's going to be your daily habits. It's going to be, did you wake up on time? Did you show up? Did you take even 5-10 minutes to have that conversation with the people in the office? Or did you just ask, hey, I need this from you. I need this from you. I need this from you. But did you actually, care and ask enough about how their weekend was to build that relationship and rapport? Because that's going to go a lot farther in who you are and your character and frankly, how much influence that you can have in the world. Um, and so, I mean, it wasn't just Dr. Michael Lamb, but Sarah and Gary, they over at Family Structure Research, children raised with an engaged father figure consistently performed better academically. um, they developed again that whole greater independence. So again, when you think of our job as parents is, you want your kids, it's really hard for a dad. It's like super hard for a dad because your role as a father is essentially to build the people around you so that they don't have to rely on you. You want everybody to be as independent as possible because that means that your due diligence. You help to prepare them so that they can go out and into the world and actually be independent and take care of themselves and to flourish. But it's really hard because you're just constantly giving, giving, giving so that they don't no longer need you. So you're again, it kind of goes back to that loving unconditionally. If you're loving so that you feel needed, it's not coming from a pure place. It's coming from an insecure place that is ultimately going to turn into them being really overly reliant on you, which may feel good now, but won't feel good 10, 15, 20, 30 years in the future, when you need to be the one that needs to be taken care of, right? When that relationship kind of switches. And what they also found was that, that whole independence is that the kids showed stronger leadership traits as well. Which again, right? What is leadership? The ability to influence. So if you're independent and you can influence, you're doing really well in life. Um, the very interesting thing, this is again goes to the dads, is like, they've done studies that shows that children even raised by single fathers outperform um guys with fatherless homes. So, for all the single moms, like, I get it. It's super hard. It is super hard. I could not imagine trying to raise Lily by myself. Um, but I know my heart breaks for all the folks that are doing it. They're true heroes because they're out there trying to make it work. They're trying to be both the motherly figure and the fatherly figure, the discipline and the lover, like trying to meld both worlds. And it's a really it's a really tough job to do. So that's why it's so important. That's why I've talked to guys and it's like, just even do the little things. Like, do you have a time during the month that just is one-on-one time with your kids? Like just you and the kids, no mom, so that you can really hear and feel like what they're going through, and you can start to shed how you like your model of the world, like try to imprint and just say like, hey, maybe this is why we don't want to talk to strangers, or maybe this is what it feels like to have your head on a swivel. Like just be aware of your surroundings, or maybe it's whatever that it is, but like you have so much knowledge within you that your kids are desperately needing. Like one of the biggest lies, or I don't want to say lie because that always comes across as like not a good thing, but something that I didn't realize is whenever I would learn something, this is part actually why I wanted to get back to this podcast. But when I'd learn something and I'd talk to people and I'd share it either at dinner or something like that, they'd be like, "Man, like that, I've never heard that before." And it always reminded me that it was like, well, shit, not everybody knows all the things that I know, and that's okay. I just always think like every time I read something, I'm like, oh, well, obviously the rest of the world knows this. Like I'm just the last one. I guess I always view myself as like the last kid, right? Or like the last person to understand whatever is going on. And that's not the case, So you have knowledge, you have good experiences, you have bad experiences that you can share. You have so much to give kids in the community, to be better leaders in all aspects, and it doesn't require, it's not this big overnight heroic thing that requires all your time and all your sacrifice. It can be just little drops of wisdom, just a helpful, helpful motivational kick here, or just words of advice over here, or just holding presence and holding space for somebody to open up to, um, because they don't know where else to go turn. So don't underestimate the power of what you have. Um, one of the best lines I've ever heard around fatherhood is that a father can be imperfect and still be powerful if he's present. And it's so true. So, so true. Um, and so I took a whole bunch of notes and I realized we're already like 45 minutes in. So, um, but the reason why this whole passivity feels easier, but it really costs more, is because guys, they don't become passive because they don't care, but because sometimes that engagement feels too risky. And so it kind of goes back to like that, people pleasing, you fear of conflict, fear of emotional incompetence, modeling of, different people that you had in your life. And it could just be because of exhaustion in your life. Um, but dude, just because something wasn't modeled doesn't mean that it's not required. Like, that was another big aha moment for me was there's so much stuff that, the people in your life, your parents, your friends, your families, like, they did the best they could, and they gave you all the best opportunities, but it takes a solid. I'm still learning stuff. Like, late 30s, and I'm still learning stuff that I never like, I don't know when the learning stops, and it might not ever stop. I might, be here in my 90s and still be saying like, "Holy shit!" Like, there's still a whole world out there that I didn't even know existed, and all these different things and all these subtleties of which discipline and which motivation and which inspiration and all that stuff. So it never ends, but that doesn't mean that we don't just keep striving for that. Um, because again, right, what wasn't modeled still becomes your responsibility. Um, Somebody said a good quote once where it said, "You you look like your parents the day you were born, um, but the day that you die shows who you were." And it was really profound because, again, like we always think, a lot of times our traumas and whatever else, like, it hits our life, but it's really ultimately our responsibility, and it's our daily habits. It's our daily workout. It's our daily what food did we eat, that really makes a difference. It's the daily where are we choosing to show our presence. Um, so I I probably want to wrap here, just because it's a little longer than normal. Um, and I try to keep these to somewhat 30-minute, chunk bite size. But key message is just where, and audit for the week is just, where are you showing up? How much presence are you really having everywhere? And where are the areas that maybe feels a little bit cold or feels a little bit distant that you might need to reinvigorate a little bit more presence in your life. So hope that works for you. Usually, like I said, we're still figuring this thing out. So um I'm gonna keep doing this YouTube thing, see if the live works out really well. If you want to join us, right? If you're listening on this on replay, um, join us on YouTube, and we'll that way you can ask comments or ask questions right as we're going through. If you want me to articulate something, or maybe you've got some specific example, or maybe something just resonates really well with you, that way you can have some more interaction, because I think that's also a big piece of this is, guys, we aren't made to do this life alone. Again, done the whole lone wolf thing. Locked myself in the gym for hours and hours on end, and full of hatred and full of pain. Um, and then on the other side, we're having a group of guys together that you can really rely on makes the biggest difference. So that's what we're trying to do here. That's what we're trying to build with Man of Class. So till next time, make it a great week. Happy January, happy Tuesday, and until next time, keep moving forward.